Good morning, everyone. How are you all doing? Nice to see a good participation early in the morning. I thought people won't show up until 11 o'clock. Okay, so today the topic that we'll be talking for the next 50 minutes is evolutionary testing strategy. As I think the name would indicate, evolutionary comes as a derivation from evolutionary architectures. I think people would have heard about building evolutionary architecture by Neil Ford, Rebecca Parsons, right? So this is an attempt to extend it to the testing domain and see what it looks like to keep the testing strategy evolving continuously. So let me tell you now itself that it's going to be me pouring a lot of my angst about how many of the organizations are not really keeping their testing strategy evolved. It is mostly stagnant and stale. And they also end up losing a lot of money financially because of that. So please bear with me as I pour a lot of that angst into you today. Yeah. So before I start pouring all of those things into you, you should know me as well. Otherwise, it just becomes very alienated, me pouring all of my emotions. So I'm Gayathri Mohan. I am the author of O'Reilly's full stack testing book. So I've got a few copies here. I'm going to give away a few copies as well today after the talk and also at the book booth. So whoever is interested, we can chat after the talk. Yeah. And I'm a principal consultant at ThoughtWorks. Mainly, I think my role is actually looking at new projects or any kind of new work that comes in modernization or existing legacy systems. So we go in and work on in the organization along with the folks in the organization, upskill them, deliver. And you can see how my frustration comes around, right? Like, I would like to start in a better place, but it's always like, why? Why didn't you do all this before? So that's the kind of experience. I've played multiple other roles inside ThoughtWorks, being the global QA SME and member of Tech Advisory Board. So that's a bit about me. I'm currently living in the UK. That's a pleasant visit to Sweden. So this is what we'll talk about today. How many of you have read the book Evolutionary Architectures or heard about evolutionary architectures? Good. Okay, so we'll touch upon briefly about evolutionary architectures so that it flows into what we mean by evolutionary testing strategy as well. And what happens when you don't evolve the testing strategy? We'll look at some practical examples and how it leads to financial loss. And then we'll look at certain approaches that I've been trying to implement practically in some of the gigs that I've worked to keep the testing strategy evolved as a process and to put a system around it. So that is what we'll be talking today. Evolutionary architectures. And if you have some questions, save it till the end. Maybe we'll come to it and discuss it properly. Yeah. Evolutionary architectures. So the premise of evolutionary architecture is basically accepting that the requirements, the software requirements, the industry, the technology is constantly evolving, right? Like we cannot be stuck to the past. We cannot actually say that what we created as a design a decade ago is what is going to work in the future as well. So what the concept is suggesting is keep your architecture in a state where you can evolve it slowly, incrementally in a guided fashion. So the system, the ecosystem should be able to support it as well. Like you cannot evolve it just like that, right? Like you need to have guardrails in place so that when you evolve it, it doesn't fall apart, it doesn't tear apart. Because you are actually delivering it to real users, and if you screw it up, it's going to result in actually production defects and whatnot, and a lot more tension to you as a programming team. So evolutionary architecture suggests that there should be a guided incremental way to support the evolution of the architecture, software architecture. You can see the quote from the book itself. So when they say in a guided fashion, right, like you have to actually evolve it incrementally in a guided fashion, they also suggest creating fitness functions, right? Fitness functions is nothing but the tests that we write, the metrics that we have, the alerting and monitoring systems that we have in place that will give that feedback continuously whenever there is a change that has been pushed into the design, whenever there is a change pushed into the development, right? So these are called as fitness functions, and these are like, as you can see, unit tests, contract tests, architecture tests, and all of those things act as a mechanism to provide feedback whenever there is an incremental change. Say you actually broke the security of the system by changing the architecture a little bit. So it will give feedback saying, no, you have introduced some vulnerabilities here. So by running some of the DAS tests that we have, those tests give feedback in the CI/CD itself. So basically, these kind of mechanisms provide an assessment of the architecture change as it evolves. Like state 1 to state 2, it gives an assessment. Okay, you have changed the architecture, but you have not tampered the existing one. You have not broken the existing ones. So there are several of these fitness functions. If you take software requirements into these 5 buckets, right, like we call it as a FERPS model, if you have heard about it, functionality, usability, reliability, performance, supportability is called as FERPS. So it's like a very broad classification. I think you will see that you have a lot more requirements that doesn't actually necessarily fall into these buckets. But if we largely put software requirements into these 5 buckets, these are the different kinds of testing techniques, both automated and manual way, that will provide that integral assessment of the solution that is in place. So if you take supportability on the top left, right, like you have architecture fitness tests, which will tell you that there is mode coupling. There's a lot of tools there, static code analyzer, dynamic code analyzers. There's performance tests, which can be on the back end, which can be on the front end, that can be as part of CI/CD pipelines. There's reliability related testing, where chaos engineering, infrastructure as code testing, all of these things can be written as tests and integrated with the CI/CD pipeline itself to give that continuous assessment of the incremental change that is going into the system. So it'll help you as a safety net, is what is the idea behind the spending energy into creating this kind of a group of tests. So you see the book icon there. I think the book is precisely a practical guide into actually how to set up these kind of tests. That's the book is about, using actual code and how to actually set up these things. So we can discuss about it later. But as you can see, there are so many ways, right? Like there are so many ways the tests are tightly coupled with the solution, tightly coupled with the software requirements. So if your requirement changes to say that you are currently looking at the data as your primary goal, data integrity as your primary goal, then you have to add some of those testing mechanisms into your testing strategy. Suddenly you bring a UI element, which means that accessibility comes into your picture. So that becomes your primary goal. So all of these things are tightly coupled. And evolutionary architecture suggests these things to be in place as a way to stay modern and stay relevant, right? Like evolvability is one of those non-functional requirements that needs to be inbuilt into the system. Otherwise, as you are developing, you're developing a legacy system. That's something that we don't even want to think, right? Like I'm actually working on a legacy system is not something that we want to think. We want to actually be progressive. We want to actually put modern technology. So what happens is these things club, and we get a lot of clients that say that now we are doing a modernization gig. That's like an effort suddenly that is like, what were you doing so long? Why didn't you stay modern? That's the question that we are trying to the evolutionary architecture is trying to answer. Now, so that is established, right? Like software requirements are changing, and software architecture needs to be in a position that needs to change, what happens when the testing strategy is not evolving? So we have established the fact that software requirements are changing every day. The users are needing a different set of requirements every single day. They want to be empowered with a lot of tools that make their lives easier. And software architecture is prone to be changing as well to support the requirements. And what happens when your testing strategy is not in harmony with the changes to the business requirements and architecture? So what I have seen, right? This is what I have seen. So basically, I've seen that the two wheels are trying to really run fast, and one wheel is locked in a tricycle, which is the testing strategy, which is not really looked upon. It's like, okay, let us do it during the release time. Oh, okay, we'll do it in the production. Okay, we'll worry about it later. What happens is literally this. It's just a way to fall down. At a later point in time, you feel like you're actually moving really fast. But yeah, the inevitable is waiting. I will actually give examples as well to prove the impact, right? These are some of the practical examples that I have seen as well on how the testing strategy being stagnant or stale has created an impact. So we'll see some examples, and then we'll also talk about how it financially affects the organization. And most often, what I've also observed is it's not that people don't know that they have to evolve the testing strategy, right? It's just that it's just lost in the hurry-burry. It's just that we'll worry about it later. There are so many other things to worry about today. The intention is there, but somehow the focus is lost. So we'll see some of these examples. How many of you have worked on a 5-year plan? Awesome. So I think one of the examples that I have worked on, so it's a large enterprise, and as I was saying, they were going into this modernization journey. The enterprise has been living for 30 to 40 years. Suddenly they realized they have to be modern. So they just started doing this modernization engagement. We have 30 to 40 years of legacy code, and people have gone, right? Like nobody stayed in the organization for 30 to 40 years. It's just like last few years somebody joined, and they are actually complaining to us, somebody wrote this code, bad code, and what is the feature doing, and they also don't know. And where is the documentation? Oh no, it's 30 years ago, you don't know. So suddenly, okay, good, wake up call. You want to modernize today? That's even good. Let's start with that journey. So we see that they are actually ramping up to put a 5-year plan, because that's how you get the budget allocated, right? Like you have to create the testing strategy, you have to create the architecture design, you have to show the delivery roadmap, and you submit it to the funding global partners to get the money. And then all the hurry-burry stopped, right? Like after that, nobody looked back at the testing strategy. It's just like you point out to that Confluence document, and then that's it. Imagine doing a testing strategy for a legacy code or legacy functionalities of 30 to 40 years and actually presenting it to get budget. What will that test strategy even look like? It's just going to be some promising words, right? Like it's just like you tell them, I promise you, I will make it happen. That kind of documentation. And the problem is, it's not even that. It's good that we are starting something. We want to actually change. But the problem is, it needs to be kept alive. Right? Like as we discover more details about the functionality, it needs to be looked back, and the details needed to be added as we discover details. So we need to accept that what we don't know is we don't know, and we have to actually keep giving the same respect that we gave while we were giving it to get the funding. The second example. So you can see a small two-tier architecture, right? So there's a website, and there are two services in the backend, and there's a database. So the team actually went ahead and did the right thing. They added a lot of unit tests, they added a lot of component tests, and then they thought E2E test for the UI will cover the entire test architecture, right? For the given software architecture, they proposed this test architecture, and it was working fine. What happened? Suddenly, the business decided website is no longer adding any value to the company. So all our competitors are going with API as a product. So let's scrap website. Let's go ahead with APIs as a product, and this is how we'll run the company. It just happens quickly, right? We like people who are actually on the team get to hear it after a month. Usually, it's like the discussions are happening, and suddenly you'll be working on all of those tests and all of those development and everything, and you'll be informed today that it's no longer the priority. So it's just like like at this point in time, what people usually think is, okay, nothing is changing. We're just scrapping the website layer. We have everything in place. But if you think about it, the E2E UI tests were actually giving the coverage of end-to-end integration testing. If you scrap that layer, you're also scrapping that feedback that you were getting from the E2E tests. Now the test architecture needs to change. There needs to be another layer of E2E tests at the API layer, right? But it's usually forgotten or usually not thought about until the very late stage. Like, okay, what happened? We were getting some kind of integration defects from the E2E UI test. Now I'm not getting. Okay, should I ask the manual team to actually look into it? It's just like really late that the realization comes that there was something missing. This is one example of where business priority changes, and we'll look at how software architecture changes affects, right? The third example, the same product, let's just consider, they scrapped the website. Now API is actually the product, right? And instead of a database, they thought that, okay, let's increase the let's actually change the database to an event stream to make a loose coupling, right? Let's look at it as in a different way. And okay, they decided scrap the database. Let's work on event streams. What happens is here once again the assumption is like, okay, we have written all the API tests, we have written all the unit tests, we have written all the contract tests, and everything should work fine. But the event stream brings a lot of asynchronous behavior. What happens to that coverage? What happens to those scenarios that needs to be tested? So usually this kind of thought process happens really late. But what happens is by the time the feature would have moved so much that you won't have that energy to look back and say, okay, we missed this. Okay, there is always that tech debt that is created on the testing side. Let's do it later kind of a mentality. Another example, soon enough, I think this is an interesting one, right? Like it won't even be like, okay, we changed something, the business changed something, the architecture changed something, and therefore there is an impact. But it'll be like, okay, let's do the performance testing. Let's get the cross-functional requirements testing done, and let's go live, as if it hasn't changed anything. Because if you see in the previous examples, majority of the folks think that there hasn't been a lot of change, right, from a testing point of view. And usually, like, okay, the team will do a manual round of testing, they'll do an end-to-end testing, and that'll be done. So unless we have paused and calculated the effort to do performance testing at the API layer and to actually change your strategy at that point in time, you won't be able to do it. It's like you can only say that run faster with all the baggage that you carry, but you can run only as much as you can. So this has happened many times, right? Like it just goes under the rug, and the capacity of reflecting back on the changes that had happened and how it had impacted the testing goes under the rug. It's just like nothing changed. And you have to even go back and say that this is how you have created an impact on the testing strategy is like a heavyweight talk to have with the team leadership or the business leadership. Even if you have that conversation, maybe they also have the right intentions, right? Like I said in the beginning of the talk, nobody has the bad intention here. Nobody really wants to put down the testing side of things. It's just that it just goes in the hurry-burry of things, hassles, everyday buzz, everything. So let's just say that after all these changes, somebody went and spoke to the business team, saying that, you know what, all these changes happened. Now I can't actually promise to go live in the same date. I can't do the testing. I don't have the capacity. They might actually be very friendly and say, okay, I'll give you more team. We'll actually add capacity now. We'll actually get more funding and give you the required capacity to do it on time. What really happens, like one of the very subtle angles is, in the same example, let's just say that there were two services, right? Like if one service, if the team has been actually allocated, more team members joining, and one team starts to actually focus on one service independently, the other team starts to work on other service independently, and then this is the strategy that is proposed in place to move faster. That will be the usual response to saying that we don't have capacity, right? Add more people, do independently, do parallelly, go live. What happens is, so far, the QAs or the testers on the team would have known the entire functionality on the team. Now that you have split the team, there's a lot of questions that needs to be answered. One is, how are the process going to be, handover processes, right? Like you don't know the functionality of one team, the other team is building. Who's going to own the system integration tests now? It could be an automated test that is running as part of CI/CD pipeline, but still, who's going to own it? Who's going to create that test moving forward? So there's a lot of that team process that needs to happen. Otherwise, it is going to be like late reaction once again, right? Like you break it and then you come back and say that, oh, we didn't do this. It was supposed to be the other team. We thought that would have been done at that point in time. Nobody did it. So that kind of conversations is what usually you see. So how team structure changes also affects the testing. It's like, it's not only the tech part of things. It's not only the architecture changes. It's not only the software requirements changes, even the team structure changes affects the testing processes. And another last example, tech industry, right? Like there's a lot of changes that are happening on I think in Øredev conference, if you had attended most of the talks, you would realize how much the tech had advanced in every field, isn't it? So it's rapidly changing. So one example is in APM got released, right? APM 2.0 version got released, which means if you had written your mobile tests using APM 1.0, then you have to move your test to APM 2.0. It is not supported anymore. They gave you time, right? They gave you time to move, but these changes are happening on a real-time basis. So this capacity, this planning, all of this needs to have happened ahead to keep your testing as well progressive. And so many innovations also happen on the testing side. I'm not sure how many of you are observing the kind of innovation that's happening on the testing side. There are a lot of tools that are coming up on a regular basis. And like it eases a lot of things for people on the team. That's the fundamental. So if we are going to adopt those changes, it's just like how we adopt, latest frameworks on the development side. It's going to be very helpful, going to make it much more smoother for the team to go live easily, give feedback easily. So it's an effort. It's that attention to all these innovations, and adopting those innovations will help the team. So another angle is the legal regulations angle. I mean, you would have heard that like all the Fortune 500 companies are like suddenly getting sued for lack of accessibility in their sites, right? Like there are a lot of cases that are happening these days. GDPR changed recently. So and there are many more such acts that are coming. If you're in the financial sector, you will know how many such regulations are there for you to actually take care of and how it is constantly getting changed. So in the UK, that there's a FCA who regulates the financial sector. They also have a lot of guidelines on what the legal compliance is to be. They do continuous research on how the test data should be, because the banking sector has all of private information, PI information. So all of these things on the tech industry changes also impacts your testing. Basically, you need to be constantly aware of what is happening on the tech industry side to incorporate that in your testing strategy to continue to stay relevant, right? Like otherwise you're just accumulating tech debt on your testing side. So all of these examples, I think, would have shown the different angles in which the testing strategy is getting affected in very different ways. What happens as an impact, right? This accumulated testing tech debt actually has a financial loss as well. So this is a recent, there's this report which states 50% of the organizations, the software developers spend only 30 to 40% of their time on feature development. The remaining time is just spent on a lot of detrimental activities, like including, I don't even want to talk about it. But the top 5 detrimenters, right? One of them includes the slow feedback loop. The slow feedback loop is nothing but you lack a poor testing coverage, you have a testing process that delays your feedback loop, you have siloed testing teams that is actually doing a job as if they are not part of the organization. So all of these things actually result in a financial loss, right? So imagine like 60 to 70% of the development time and effort. How much does it cost? So can we, even if there is a slight improvement in these kind of testing activities to increase the feedback loop, right? Like if a defect that was caught in the production, if it could have been caught earlier, or if the feedback from the release cycle could have been caught earlier in the CI/CD pipelines, all of these small improvements by keeping your testing strategy alive could save you a lot of money that can actually go in as innovations, because we want to work on new stuff. We could actually go back and say that now give me funding for doing some innovations. We don't know what happens, but yeah, this is how it accumulates. Even though it is all pushed under the rug, it's just seen as a small discomfort of not doing it early, but this has an actual impact. This is where I think the evolutionary testing strategy comes into picture. So the evolutionary testing strategy is nothing but the test architecture, the testing processes, the testing team structure are all constantly, and the key word is proactively, looked back, right? And is kept in harmony with the software architecture and the business requirements. That's all it is. So it's something that it's not something that is like an entirely new stuff. It's just that the mindset of keeping the testing strategy proactively alive rather than just being reactive to all the changes at the very late cycle and just bearing the grunt of doing the catching up work. So certain processes, certain approaches will help in keeping the testing strategy alive if incorporated in our software development cycle. So that's what we are going to look at. Version control the test suites. First one. I'm not sure. I mean, this might seem like actually, yeah, everyone is doing What is new in that? I've still seen that the most of the test suits are just living in somebody's local box, and they just run it and only when there is a need, right? It's not actually maintained in version control. It's not actually integrated as a regular feedback cycle in the CI/CD pipelines. So this is actually very important, mainly because of the fast feedback that I was pointing out earlier in the report. So it gives that kind of fast feedback, and it also gives the ability to take the evolution of the test architecture as a uh, versioned system, right? Just like how architecture is versioned and moved from one to another, you can actually version your test architecture and version it to be in parallel with your architecture. Documenting your versioning strategy is another simple step. So what we mean by that is, like I said, the testing strategy needs to be in tandem with the architecture. If your architecture is changing, the testing strategy needs to be looked back and be proactively changed to support the new architecture. So documenting the architecture and the testing strategy together in a harmonized way, in a coherent way, will help to keep the evolution as a constant process. Once you know that you have moved your architecture to new, it should be like a mentality to look back at your testing strategy and to have a new version there. And a good place to start this kind of versioning is the ADRs and BDRs. How many of you have ADRs? Awesome. Okay. So this ADR is nothing but an architecture decision record, and BDR is nothing but a business decision record. So what really goes in there is whenever there is a proposal to change the architecture or to advance the architecture, a thorough analysis of what is the change, why is the change, and what is the pros and what is the cons, and then that is what is called as an architecture decision record. And once that is done, currently there is no place to put in the impact on the testing strategy, right? Like whatever changes that you're proposing as part of ADR, that needs to also say, this is how it will impact your testing strategy. So having a mechanism to say that here is an impact on the testing strategy because of this ADR. So that will make it like as a continuous process to look at how can we keep the testing strategy in alignment with the software architecture. Similarly, business decision record. So whenever the business is changed, like I said, like changing the website as a product suddenly, it's a big change, but there are also very small changes, right? Like that'll seem like a no-brainer, but it'll actually be like, they'll suddenly say that we are not going live in this country because of whatever reason. So, but what does it really mean? How does it actually impact on the testing strategy is something that the BDR should also have a record in it. And creating accountabilities, like I think like most of the time, like I said, right, it's just that it's forgotten. It's just that nobody has the wrong intentions of not really advancing the testing strategy. It's just that somebody had forgotten because of the pressure that they are going in, right? So having the clear accountabilities, if there is luxury to bring in roles like test architect of head of QA in your organization, it depends upon the size of the organization as well, right? It's not everyone's cup. But even if it is a small organization, having that responsibility defined within the team, even if it is a tech director or engineering manager, who is actually accountable for that, needs to be established very clearly. And this is an age-old stuff. I'm not going to banter on it again. Include the testers on the team is like, oh, thanks. Thank you. So including the testers on the team is like, once again, like we have to actually have someone to think about it constantly, because like if you see, the mindset is like, okay, we need to deliver this fast. So what will be the development effort that goes into it? It's just that nobody is thinking about the testing effort proactively. So from the design, from the business decision, from the architecture versioning, having someone constantly thinking about it is what is all this is about. So including, usually it's the testers on the team. If there are other roles that are accountable for testing, then let's also actually look at that possible way to have them think about this from the beginning. That's all is the intention about. Have someone thinking about it in the team from the beginning, from all the way to delivery. And yeah, nothing can happen without a bit of contingency planning, right? Like we can all be like saying we have the right intentions, we want to do this, but if there is like constant delivery pressure of going live, nothing is going to be actually on paper. It'll be just on paper, it'll not be in action. So having that contingency plan. And what happens usually is the delivery plan will have contingency, but the development effort consumes all of it, right? Like it's just that it eats up everything. Oh no, there's a defect, I need more time. The contingency is never getting allocated to the testing side of things. So having that small contingency for testing called out earlier, and if you are using it or not is another thing. Just having that small proportion just for testing, not as a broad bucket for the whole project, because it gets eaten up by the development effort itself most of the time. Having that small contingency is a great way, and you can also track the how much has been consumed, what is the risk that it has eliminated, right? Like the contingency that you asked for, because of that I was able to eliminate this risk, and because of that you were able to save some costs. So that kind of having that cost versus risk conversation while asking for contingency will help. And the last one, evangelize and communicate. So these are small set of practices that I've seen work, but there's a lot more, I feel, right? Like each of the team has a different mindset. Each of the organization has a different culture. Each team has a different roles. So I think it's up to the team to see what kind of small changes that we can bring in to evangelize this approach, and keep communicating about it. Like one of the things that I constantly do is call out all of these things that has affected the testing strategy in a retrospective meeting, or just in a tech huddle, or in the stand-ups, or whatever mechanism, simple mechanisms that you can keep talking about it, then it is actually taking precedence. So having that awareness going on within the team will help in getting that required attention. Like I said, everybody wants things to be good. It's just that it's just forgotten. And with that positive mindset, let's also bring that awareness by constantly talking about it to the team, what is being missed out. That's it. And all the effort, you get to stay modern and not really work on a legacy system as you are developing, right? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, folks.